right. Well, welcome everybody to Breaching the Boardroom. I am your host, David Dean Morrow, and in the studio today is Michelle Kail, head of Casa Heartland. She's got a great story, English teacher turned nonprofit leader, running an all-volunteer advocacy army for children in the court system. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really, really excited to join you today and share a little bit about my story and our mission. And yeah.
Well, great. So that's a pretty significant transition, right? Teaching, what was it? Was it high school English, as
Yep,
I understand?
School English.
Yeah. So high school English to running a nonprofit, different classroom entirely.
Very much.
Yeah. So what did teaching teach you about leading adults that management books or, some master class couldn't?
I really think that the biggest thing that I learned in my time teaching, I worked with middle schoolers and then I worked with high schoolers. And honestly, in the transition, I kind of realized that adults aren't that much different. Working with adults and teaching and leading adults are not that much different than, working with adolescents, in the sense that, building trust with individuals. One thing that we learned through, teaching pedagogy is that if you want someone to listen to what you have to say, you have to build trust with your students before they're going to be open to any type of input and learning. And so I think that is very much true for adults as well, that, it really is about establishing that relationship first in a professional sense, and then being able to build trust with your peers, with your colleagues, with your staff members, and then giving them that input. And so I think that's something that has translated really well, and it might be touched on in some management books and whatnot, but it is very different when you think about it from the mindset of, that working with adults is a lot like working with kids, in that sense that, kindergartners are not going to, warm up to you or really maybe not even listen to you until they have established that you're a trusted adult. And I think it's really the same when it comes to building relationships with our peers and other leaders and in the, community members, partners as well. So that's something that I think has really stood out to me throughout this transition.
Makes perfect sense. So let's back up a second. Explain your current role for the audience, and then kind of what the mission of Casa.
Absolutely. So I serve as the executive director for Casa of the Heartland, which is basically like the nonprofit CEO equivalent. And I'll be honest, I did not realize that when I stepped into this role. And so it is, and it's a little different in nonprofit because I don't have an HR department or an IT department, or, it's really just me or the staff that I've put in place or other individuals or entities that we contract with to make sure that, we have everything we need and that we're taken care of as an organization. So a lot of it is just really overseeing, I always say it's like putting together a giant puzzle every day of figuring out where the holes are, where the missing pieces are, and then figuring out how to get those pieces filled in, or is it something that we can go without? And how do we just make sure that we have enough people, enough money, and the support that we need to carry out our mission, which is providing advocacy for children who are navigating the court system due to dependency, neglect, and abuse. So kiddos who are in the court system because a caregiver in their life has let them down in some way and they need additional support. So our job is to make sure that they have a voice and that their best interests are represented, so that way they don't fall through the cracks.
That's great. And it's a wonderful, wonderful mission as well. Let me ask you, the team that you lead, are they employees of Casa? Is it a mix of employees of the organization and volunteers? What's the makeup of?
Yeah, so we do have a professional staff that is mainly consists of our advocate coordinators, which really are our support system for our CASA volunteers. So they are really doing like the volunteer supervision and the case management side of the advocacy that we do. And then we also have an advocate trainer. She helps vet all of our CASA volunteers when we're onboarding them. They go through a pre-service training to, just give them a basic set of tools and resources to be able to navigate the court system and provide that advocacy. And so that is kind of the bulk of our staff makeup. We have some other like more administrative roles, like a director of operations that oversees all of our grant applications and managing and reporting. So we have, I think, a staff of 12 people now. So when I started, we were at 4. So we've grown a lot in the last 3 years, but that is our staff makeup. And then we have usually between 80 to 120 volunteers who are providing that direct support and advocacy to the children that they're serving.
So, and this is a large part of some of the organization members is to attend court hearings, right? So when there's a prosecution, let's say, of a guardian or a dad or a mom of a child, somebody has to advocate for that child, right? And then the people that you lead actually step in there and advocate to the court for the best interests of the child, right?
Yes. And we want to make sure that, our staff members and our CASA volunteers, because like our CASA volunteers come from, all different backgrounds. You don't have a background in child welfare or law or anything like that to be a CASA volunteer. But we also want to make sure that because you can kind of come from any background, that you have the resources to be able to go to court and testify, to understand the process, to be able to understand like what the process is for the social worker who's working the case, because we're still working within a system that's not perfect, and so sometimes things don't move as quickly as we'd like them to, but really making sure that our volunteers are trained up and have what they need to be able to navigate the court system. But the biggest thing that our CASA volunteers do, where I think the most impact happens, is building a relationship with the child or the children that they're working with, getting to know them, getting to know what they want for their situation. And our ultimate goal is to help that child achieve permanency, whether that's through reunification with their parents, if that's safely possible. It could be a permanent placement with a family member or a relative, could be adoption, or sometimes with our older youth where we realize that, it's not really going to be feasible for them to find permanency with someone else, but we can work with them so that way they can achieve independence and permanency on their own and become a self-sufficient young adult.
That's wonderful. When you mentioned something earlier, so I want to touch on that. When you first became executive director, I think it was back in 2023, 3 years ago, as you mentioned, what did you think the job was compared to what it turned out to actually be? Because I don't think you're alone there. I think a lot of people are like, that job sounds cool, and I knew somebody who did something like that. And then they get into the day-to-day and they're like, I had no idea it was going to be like this.
So the job description, of course, was, a lot of, staff oversight and, just a lot of
buzzwords, right? Just a lot of buzzwords, right? A lot of keywords.
Like that. And so I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to come in and then I'd also heard people say things like, well, you're going to be the face of the organization. And I'm like, what does that mean? So I knew that there would be like a level of community outreach, community involvement, and then like some staff oversight, and then fundraising. So that was really what was hit really hard in the job description. And then I got in the role, and I remember I was probably like 1 month in, and we were filling out a grant application, and it said like director/CEO equivalent. And I was like I'm supposed to sign that? Like that's me? And I'm like, I knew that I'm like the executive director, but like I hadn't thought about that this is really like a CEO equivalent for a for-profit business is the executive director role in a nonprofit. And at the time, we were much smaller. We were only serving in one county. So I'm like, okay, well, this really changes the lens and my approach to this position. And so I started doing a lot more research of, different structures of other organizations and roles and responsibilities of CEOs and executive directors. And then the other thing that happened is about 30 days in, we went through a quality assurance audit with our state entity. And that was also really, it was terrifying, but also wonderful at the same time, because I was able to come into the role and see like, here are kind of our weak points and where we have opportunities for growth. And so I was able to go into this role with a growth mindset of, here's where we can make improvements. Here's where we can expand our mission. And so now when people ask me, like, what do you do? My response is whatever's needed. And that is how I view this role. Is it is my job to make sure that the train keeps moving no matter what. If we have staff transitions, if we're going through expansions, if we're having a judicial transition, like, it does not matter. My job is to be the master puzzle putter together and make sure that things run as smoothly as possible, specifically to where we are not going to have a lapse in services, that the children that we're serving are not going to suffer because of anything that's going on in our world. And that might look like, putting on a fundraising event. It might look like giving a presentation in the community. It might look like going on home visits because we're down a staff member. Like, whatever is needed, I'm kind of like the putty to fill in and make sure that everything is taken care of, so that way we can continue to maximize our services and make sure that our kiddos are taken care of.
So leading by example with the framework of the best interest of the children in mind.
Very much so. Very much so, yeah.
So as you started to learn what the new role was like, someone clearly poured into you along the way, or led you or showed you what good looks like. Who shaped how you were going to lead, if anyone? Was it a book, a leader, a workshop, a mentor? How did you come up with your leadership framework? Because whether people identify it as a framework or not, they all have a theoretical framework through which they operate.
So I think that, when I started, I very early on identified two other individuals in our community who, from my perspective, seem to really have it together in terms of working in nonprofit and in terms of leadership, their, presence in the community, even just their presence within a room. And I was fortunate enough that both of those individuals were on my board of directors. And so I got with them pretty early on. And, I was like, here are the things that I'm confident in. And then here are the elements of this position that I'm not really sure about, or I feel like I could use some support. And so was really able to get connected with a group of individuals in our community, and to be able to not be afraid to ask questions and say, hey, I've never done HR management before, and we're about to hire, our first staff member. What should I be, other than like obvious red flags, like, how do I know that this person's going to be a good fit? Or is there something else that I should look for outside of their qualifications and their work experience, and just the vibe that you get in an interview from somebody and their personality? Or, I have to raise $300,000 this year, and the most money I've ever raised is like, $3,000 doing a t-shirt fundraiser at our high school. So how do you, make 100 times that in your first year in a position like this? And just being able to take their recommendations, and when they recommend books or trainings, to really just be open to learning. And that's another thing that I feel like, coming from a background in education, is that I've always prided myself on being a lifelong learner, that my job in terms of learning is never done. And
Right.
and just being open to take those learning opportunities, whether it's a mistake you've made and you're learning the hard way, or a training that you're going to attend, and being able to accept other people pouring into you as a growth opportunity, I think is really what helped me really just grow into this role so quickly and feel comfortable.
That's great. You guys have experienced a lot of growth. I think you expanded into other counties. I thought it was maybe Hart County in 2025. It's always exciting to read about that. But what was some of the parts that nobody warned you about? What are some of the things you learned through that rapid growth?
Honestly, just being able to be comfortable being in discomfort, I think, is something that we had to learn really quickly. Like I said, when I started, we were serving one county. And so in about 3 years, well, actually in exactly 3 years, we went from serving in one county to serving in 6 counties. We've underwent 3 different expansions in 3 different formats. So, our first one was a county that had never had a CASA program, had never been served by CASA. And so it was a true, new startup of services in this county. We acquired 3 other counties through a program that was, they decided to dismantle. And the children that had previously had CASA services were going to, and these counties were going to go unserved. So we had the opportunity to do an expansion and acquire that service area that, already had some familiarity with CASA. And then we had another county that was just transitioned from another CASA program to us because they had opportunities to explore growth in a different direction. And so I always joked that we've kind of been the model of any way you can expand a CASA program, we've probably done it at this point. And so just being able to, and you had mentioned like leading by example. One thing that I have learned throughout all of the growth and the many transitions that we've undergone is that it's also my job to keep everybody else calm. So
Yes.
when we're going through, a transition and we're onboarding 45 new advocates at one time that we've, that we're transitioning over from a previous CASA program, being able to go to my staff and say, okay, look, here's the plan that I've come up with. What feedback do you have? And then also giving the entire team to have an opportunity to buy in and take ownership in these transitional processes, because I think by default, like as humans, we want to feel in control, even when things are unpredictable or new, or, it's a big undertaking. So having everybody be able to come to the table and not start from scratch of, hey, let's all, just pitch out all the ideas, but come with something that is a feasible plan and then seek feedback from the rest of your team to see, okay, well, I know I'm not perfect. And so what areas or weaknesses do you see in this plan, or areas where we could improve to make this a smoother transition? And then that gives everybody buy-in. So then instead of like me just leading this transition, we're all leading this transition as a team and all have that high level of buy-in and commitment to the plan that we've formed together. And I think that has been incredibly important, because then it gives everybody a sense of ownership and control throughout the process. Even when, side quests happen and things don't go as planned, I would say there's comfort in still having a plan. And I think that has been the best approach to navigating transition and growth for our program.
It seems to me that by leading by example and inspiring them and getting their buy-in, it's really been effective. And I think there's a great leadership lesson in that. Being able to bring them the plan, the people that you're going to lead into a new venture, right? And getting their feedback, right? Listening to that, they feel heard, they're on board, and then now they make it their own, right? And so with that buy-in, as opposed to just dictatorial top down, that rarely works anyway, just because of human nature. That's really interesting approach. And that's one you don't see often, right? And that's probably why you've been able to, quadruple in size in such a short period of time, or triple in size. Let me do my math. Triple in size.
Yeah. So, and like you said, it's, it's human nature for us to not, be able to operate under that like dictator style leadership. And so, like you said, giving them that buy-in, I think also like as a leader, like you have to be able to be vulnerable and accept the feedback that's given to you and not take it personally, because at the end of the day, like it's not about me as an individual. It is about our program and our ability to continue to serve the children that we're advocating for to the best of our ability, and to maximize those services from a quality and quantity standpoint. And so, as an individual, like I have to be vulnerable and accept that, okay, well, this is the plan, like this is the square one. But if we can, have a rock solid plan in place, and that means that some of my ideas might not have been good, like I have to be okay with that, because it's not about me. It's about the whole of the organization. And, if other people have better ideas, I want to hear them, and that's what we want to use. And so it does take, a level of vulnerability going into a room with 10 other people and saying, hey, here's what I've come up with, pick it apart. and then being okay to accept other people's feedback, to have, and I know that it's kind of a buzzword, but to have that synergy where you have all of the brains operating at a whole that's bigger than, than me as an individual. And that really, or as, as any of us as individuals, really is what sets us up for success.
Well, and that lesson applies outside of the nonprofit space
So
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And being able to dismantle or disengage a leader's ego from that, right? Being okay to say, here's where we have to get, here's my plan, but I'm open to, tweaks and adjustments along the way based on your feedback. That's critical to
And,
adaptability, and
and I always,
adaptability seems
yeah,
to be
oh,
the key
absolutely.
to success.
Yeah, and I always joke that, like, if anybody's having a hard time letting go of their ego, they should go do a lesson in a middle school classroom, because there's nobody more brutal and honest than middle schoolers. They will
Yes.
criticize your delivery, your approach, your outfit, everything. And so if you need to be humbled, go in and teaching a lesson to some middle schoolers. This is definitely the way to do it, because you will figure out how to be vulnerable after that. So
Yeah. When I started my career, I was a prosecutor and I dealt a lot with injured criminal victim children, and it was devastating. It really takes a toll on a lot of people. I saw a lot of CASA members burn out. I saw them go through a lot of psychological challenges themselves. Like, when the work that you guys do brings you face to face with children in the hardest situations imaginable, how do you carry that weight? And how do you help your team members not burn out?
the honestly, it really goes back to that leading by example, because that's something that I've, going into education, like, always struggled with. You always have your duties, and then you have your other duties as assigned. And so for me, it is making sure that, number one, I'm taking time for myself. I know it might sound cliche, but I always hear people say, like, you can't pour from an empty cup. And so it's my responsibility, for me as our leader, to take a step back when I need it. And if that means, taking a half day here and there, or, taking a little extra time at lunch, or giving plenty of opportunities. We go out to lunch as a staff, or just kind of, I'll call anybody who wants to go, like, we're going to meet at this location. I really think that there's not like a big specific answer on how to make sure that your people don't get burnout. But number one, recognizing that they are humans, and that at the end of the day, this is their job, but they still have all of this other stuff going on in their life, whether they're
Right.
parents, whether they are dealing with, sick parents of their own, or if they have something in their background that might be triggered by some of the things that we see and encounter with the cases that we're on. So making sure that, number one, like, that I know my people and know what they need. Like, if I see, someone's just, they've been a little off lately. They haven't been as engaging in conversations, making sure that I check on people to say, hey, you've just seemed a little down lately. Like, is everything okay? And to tell them, like, if you need to take a day off, take a day off. Like, we will hold down the fort. And I think it goes back to, being whatever I'm needed to be, to make sure that my staff members are supported. And then, some of them are supporting up to 30 CASA volunteers, and being able to know when you need to take a step back, and giving them space to know that that's okay. If you need to take a sick day, take a sick day. Like, because if you're going to be here, I want to make sure that you can do the job and give 100%. And so if you can't, then take a step back and take care of yourself, and come back when you feel comfortable doing that. And we'll hold down the fort in the meantime. And then we try to also just have some fun every now and again. Like, when we have a staff meeting, like, and it's so funny, because we always joked about this in teaching, is that, you might not get a pay raise, but you might get a taco bar for lunch. And so we try to do fun
They
things.
go far though.
Yeah.
Those make life worth living, right?
When we have a staff meeting, like, we try to do, one day we did like Friday mocktails during our staff
That's
meeting, and another
great.
day we did like a nacho bar. And, like I said, there's only 12 of us, so to get a big old bag of chips and some nacho cheese at Sam's Club, it's not a big undertaking in terms of an expense, but it does a lot for morale, and just,
Right.
building that, and also just giving space for people to vent when they have a hard case, and being able to listen and validate people's feelings, or give them some type of guidance and insight on, well, this might be a different approach, or if you need me to put on the boss lady hat and talk to this individual for you, or we deal with some interesting humans navigating the court system, and sometimes we have parents or caregivers who are rude to our CASAs or our staff.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I'm always happy to say, like, I'm happy to make that phone call and say that this is not how this is going to work. Like,
Right.
because just having their backs. So I don't think that there's, one big shiny thing. I think it is consistently prioritizing the well-being of your people, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they've got to be on their game and their head in it and their heart in it to be able to achieve the mission for the children. So that's, and I love that because having those, where they can, let down their hair and loosen their ties and just kind of be themselves. That's really where you get to the truth of what's going on and what are you hearing? And you can actually have those authentic conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. So, given what we do with security and AI and data protection, I always worry about the court systems and places like CASA, right? Because in a kid's case file, it's basically a permanent record of their worst moments in life. When that data gets leaked or gets attacked by somebody that is just they're not targeting you specifically, but they're targeting a vulnerability in your systems or whatever, right? That's not a stolen credit card, right? It's something that follows them for life. How do you address that? How do you think about that?
I think, number one is a lot of training for both our CASA
Mhm.
volunteers and our staff. There are some small measures that we take that, some other CASA programs, may or may not do, or other nonprofits. But, because of the sensitive information that we're dealing with, we try to make sure that we get hard copies from the court and it goes
Good.
directly into our case management database. And so making sure that we're working with trusted vendors who, they have good security measures is one thing that we can do to help protect our kiddos. We try to make sure that our CASA volunteers, we assign everybody a CASA specific email under our domain. So that way we don't have, cheermom@gmail.com over here
Right.
emailing, an attorney or a teacher and asking for records, because then we are no longer in control of that, and we can't shut that down or, access that if that person is no longer with the program. Whereas when we give them those specific, specific CASA emails, we can pull their access to that, or, wipe that out if they're no longer with the program. And so I think it's a lot like the staff situation, finding like the little things that we can do. I know we were excited to do the cybersecurity training with you all recently, and I had several staff members who asked questions about, oh, well, could we also do XYZ to kind of just tighten up our own measures? And so I think it's just number one, going into it with the mindset of this is really important, and that we
Mhm.
have to be good stewards of the information that we are overseeing in advocating for these children, making sure that, and this is something that sometimes when people hear like, oh, they're a volunteer organization, like they're probably not that stringent. And I'm like, no, because we are a volunteer organization, we have to be even more stringent with our security measures, because, we're relying on everyday people, and it's our responsibility, as professionals, to train them up and make sure that they understand the severity of the information that they're being trusted with. So making sure that, information can't be easily downloaded from a database, or that if they're viewing it, it's only in the browser and it can't be downloaded to their personal computers, or just different measures like that. And a lot of that goes back to making sure that we're doing the little things in house, and then working with trusted vendors who, might be supplying other resources to us, or other services to us as an organization, that everybody's doing their part, that it's not just about what we're doing, but also the people that we're working with and what they're doing to help protect our program.
That's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. And we enjoyed doing that with y'all. You guys had some really good questions. You've mentioned that one of the best things you like about doing your job is watching children find permanency and stability in their life. Tell me about like a success story as we wrap up our conversation today. Like share, when it works, when Casa hits the home run for a child, like what does that look like for the child?
Yeah. So this one, it's a little heavy. Most
Hmm.
of what we deal with is, but we had one case that had a sibling group, so several little kids that were all around elementary school age, and they were in the court system because of neglect. And abuse. So their biological mom's boyfriend had abused them. And so they had been removed from that situation. She had some issues with substance abuse. And so, they'd been removed from that situation and placed in foster care. Well, pretty soon after they were in foster care, their mom was murdered. And it was a really, it was a really unfortunate situation for these kiddos. They're devastated. And then through that, like we were able to identify that they had grandparents close by. And, because of
Who may have lost contact with the mom given her lifestyle, right?
yes, yeah, that's exactly what had happened. Like she had been, the biological mom had been abusing drugs and had been in some unhealthy relationships and hadn't been in contact with her parents. And so as soon as they found out, like we've got these grandbabies and like we're willing to take them in. And so there were, a lot of different things that, had to happen, but we were able to advocate for those kiddos to be placed with their grandparents. And then, one step further, like we were able to help them access her social security death benefits so that way they could have some additional support and resources to provide for these children. And so that was one success story. So now all the kiddos are with grandma and grandpa, and they're doing great. Like they're in school, and they're loving it there, and really have that stability and that permanency that we hope to help every child achieve. And so that was one that, some of the most unfortunate circumstances that led to what we know is going to be a good stable environment for those kiddos, for the rest of their time. So that's
I
one that
love that story. I
really hit.
love that.
Yeah,
That's
really
that's
put on.
really wonderful. Yeah, because if you guys don't do it, there's that void that sits there and the dots don't get connected. That's why you guys exist. So that's fantastic. So what's on the horizon for you?
Well,
Like,
hopefully
do
no
you have
more
a,
expansions.
yeah,
So
I was going to say, like, is there anything coming up as we wind into fall?
so we're really the second half of the year is really focused on volunteer recruitment for us. We do a lot of our fundraising in the first half of the year, and so we've kind of wrapped a lot of that up. So really, we're hitting volunteer recruitment really hard. We've got a little over 150 children on our wait list, which means that our judges have appointed CASA to these children, but we don't have the manpower or the
Resources, yeah.
volunteer base to support them yet. And so we are always looking for ways to partner with other entities in the community to share our mission and hopefully get some individuals on board who are willing to step up and serve these kiddos. And I always tell everybody, I'm like, look, you do have to pass a background check and go through the training, but really the most basic requirement is just having a heart for children and being willing to make time in your schedule to prioritize, advocating for them. And so that's what we've got really going on for the next, the rest of this year is hitting that volunteer recruitment pretty hard. And we will host a volunteer recruitment summit in September here in Hardin County. And it's a really great opportunity because we're not asking for a commitment, but it is just an opportunity for us to bring individuals together from within the community and basically say, like, we want you to leave here with no more questions. Like, we want to make sure you have all your questions answered, and then for sure that either being a CASA volunteer is a good fit for you or it's not. And if it's not, that's okay, because sometimes that's just as important as knowing that you are a good fit is knowing that it might not be something that's right for you. And so that's going to be our big focus. And we just grew our staff by one more, so we'll be onboarding a new staff member. So right now we're in a really just growing our mission. So I think we're hopefully done growing geographically for now and just working on making sure that we can continue to propel our services.
That's fantastic. If somebody is interested in volunteering or at least learning more, how do they get in touch with you guys?
Yeah, absolutely. So for our local program, we cover Hardin, LaRue, Meade, Breckenridge, Grayson, and Hart counties. You can visit casaheartland.org/volunteer. And there's all kinds of wonderful information on our website about what being a CASA volunteer looks like, what the commitment is like. And there's even a really neat quiz on there that's is CASA volunteering right for you? And if you're in other areas, there are CASA programs all across the state. So if you visit the Kentucky CASA Network's website, you can find a local CASA program in your area.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today and sharing
Oh,
the leadership stories, stories of expansion, the mission that you guys do for kids. So
well, thank you so much.
we think the world of you guys. So thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.